Shabbat Shalom. My name's David Rodwin, and this is The Life. So, it's Saturday morning. It's a cold and gray Saturday morning here in Los Angeles, but I'm taking you with me on my walk to temple today. That's right, I actually walked to temple. It's the first time I've ever been able to do that in my life, really, and it's kind of exciting. Now, I'm not Shomer Shabbos or anything crazy like that. I'm not Orthodox. I happen to be wearing a yarmulke just because I put it on before getting to temple today. It's about a 20-minute walk to temple, but don't worry, I won't be talking that entire time. But it made me think about, why do I go to temple? And this is not something I have really done my entire adult life. In fact, I kind of stopped going to temple in high school after I got bar mitzvahed, and I would go back for the big holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but I didn't go regularly on Shabbos. Not until a few years ago, since I moved back to Los Angeles. I tried going a few times in New York to B'nai Jeshurun, but I didn't really enjoy it. People told me it would be wonderful. There were young folk there and alternative services with great music, and I actually did not like the music at all. And while people at B'nai Jeshurun did invite me out for drinks afterwards, I found them a little bit scary. They were all, well, frankly, my age now, but this was 10 years ago when I was going to this temple, checking it out for the first time. And when they were in their mid-40s and divorced and very enthusiastic, it wasn't very appealing to me at all. Ironically, my current rabbi was a rabbinic intern at B'nai Jeshurun when I was checking it out 10 years ago. Nowadays I go to Ikar, where Rabbi Brous is the head rabbi, and I'm still not quite sure why I go. But before I went to Ikar, I went to a place called Meshuga. And the reason I went to Meshuga is because my cousin Lester invited me there. He originally invited me for high holidays, but a few months later, after telling myself I really ought to go back just for a regular Shabbat, I finally went. Now, part of the reason I went was because I'd broken my leg, and it was a really difficult time, quite frankly. Deeply isolated, I was needing community and just human contact, frankly. Interestingly, the Parsha, the Torah portion today, was about what happens when someone is forced into isolation, specifically when they're deemed impure by the rabbis. What's more, another study showed that if you go to a religious service at least 4 times a month, you are likely to live 4 to 10 years longer than someone who doesn't. So that's one reason I guess I should go to temple, though it really hasn't been on my mind. So I went to a Shabbat service there, and the rabbi saw me and immediately came up to me after services, basically to find out if I liked it, because I was one of the younger folks there, and did I know anyone else that I could bring along, particularly the ladies. Now, I thought it was their responsibility to bring those in, but apparently not so much the case. Interestingly, with Ikar, my current temple, Ikar, has a reputation for being the singles temple of Los Angeles. But unfortunately, that was the case about 7 years ago, and all of those people have gotten married to one another. Which brings me back to the question of, why do I go to temple? And I will say, I have found community there. There aren't people who I would necessarily run into otherwise, and many of them I like. In addition, I really love the practice of doing something that my ancestors did. You know, it's kind of amazing to think that my great to the 15th grandparents were actually also reading from Torah and listening to the same words that were absolutely confounding to them as well as to me. And the stories probably made as little sense to them as they do to me. And it's the process of wrestling with these insane stories and trying to figure out our lives that is somehow appealing. I don't really experience a spiritual connection while praying in temple. The other thing which I find really interesting is that some people pray to get things. They pray for certain things to happen. And that's something that I never did actually until a few years ago. And then one Yom Kippur about 6 years ago, when I was desperately looking for work, I started praying to God, just, if you give me work, I will come back every Shabbat. Honestly, this felt foreign, if not false. It felt like I was praying to the God of Salieri, the one that you can make bargains with, and that's not a God I'm familiar with. My God is not really a sentient being for all the Old Testament says. God is just the creator of creators. It's this amorphous life force, and I'm probably more influenced by Star Wars than anything else in terms of my conception of the divine, but That's where I stand. The old man with the beard is not my God. So even though I don't know all the prayers that well, and even though I don't exactly believe in the God with the big long beard, and even though I'm not going to be meeting any girls in temple, and even though I'm really not sure what I get out of it, I still go. Week after week. And I wonder what kind of solace we can get out of religion, because my cousin Lester, who first brought me to Meshuga, which was the temple that eventually led me to Ikar, where I go now, Lester killed himself last month. And he had lost hope, and he had lost sight of the things that were really important. And he didn't go to temple regularly, and part of me wonders if he did go, if he would find any kind of spiritual salve that would have given him hope. I don't know if it would have, because practicing Judaism can be a deeply alienating experience. I was just at a Shabbaton with my temple where we went away into the country for 2 days and spent lots of time praying and building community. And after the meals, there's a process called benching, which is just saying grace after meals. But for Jews who really are into it, it's a long process with tons of prayers. And it's something I never learned. And for me, I went over and I joined one group one time, but I simply did not know the prayers. And while there was a little book and I tried to follow along, half the time I couldn't find where they were. And even though there were people there who were willing to help me, it's like going to perform in a musical that you've never seen before. It's really difficult when you're just thrown on stage. And after a few minutes, I just felt so not Jewish that I got up and I left. And I walked out into the countryside. And there I lay on the grass and I looked up at the stars and I felt far more connected to any kind of divinity. So if the practice of Judaism can be that alienating for someone who is trying and for someone who has a few ideas as to how to pray and the general rituals involved, how did Jews possibly get connected with some kind of spiritual divine force that gives them solace and hope, so Judaism becomes a crutch to lean on in hard times? Because really, in some ways, that's what it's for. You know, when we say the mourner's Kaddish after someone dies, it's partially because I think you don't know what to say after someone dies. It's a horrible thing. The kind of loss and grief associated, it's hard to come up with your own words, so that the fact that someone else has given you words that you can just recite and that you're supposed to recite, it makes you feel like you've done something, so, sort of like you've said something, when sometimes your own words just, they don't suffice. So perhaps that's good for us who are still amongst the living when we're mourning the dead. But what about the people who are teetering on the edge? What can this religion do for them? My name's David Rodwin. Shabbat Shalom. I guess it's time to turn this thing off.